with all of that.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay, so just so you know, we've started the recording now. So thank you for all those who are listening to our recorded session. My name's Kayley. I'm Vice President of the Hastings Business Women's Network, and we meet every Monday with our panel and guests to chat about what's relevant and what's current in terms of the situation that we find ourselves in here in our business community. So we're going to get started, and normally we are joined by Leslie Williams, our local member, but unfortunately she is an apology today. So Kelly, I'm just going to go to you with a message that Leslie sent for us.
Thanks, Kayley. So for those who don't know me, my name is Kelly King. I am the president of the Hastings Business Women's Network. So good morning and thank you for joining our session today. I do have apologies from Leslie Williams this morning, who has joined us for previous sessions. Her advice to us this morning is that in our local area there aren't any other COVID-19 cases. So we've had no new cases in the Port Macquarie Hastings LGA, which is great news for our local community. And as I said, Leslie is an apology. I'm sure she's incredibly busy after the stage 1 announcements that were made on Friday by Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, and also our Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, made further announcements to that and how they will roll out in New South Wales later this week. So I'm sure Leslie is very busy, and I'm sure we'll see her online in other formats and on other platforms later in the week as those new guidelines roll out into our community for businesses and for people to be able to, you know, have a relaxing of those restrictions as we move forward. Right. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Kelly, and it's a really great way to start our session today because we're mindful that we're hoping to be entering into a period of more freedom and less restrictions around how we run our business and our lives, and I'm sure Leslie is busy with that. I'll just welcome you, Kaylee. Thanks for joining, and I'm also just letting someone else into the room, which is Alex. As I always say, just remember, if you have got any questions, you can either just raise your hand and we'll go to you when it's a small group like this, or feel free to put your questions in the chat box, either privately to me or publicly. It's up to you, and we'll address your questions as we go. Morning, Alex. So what we're going to do this morning, since we've had Leslie's update, is we're going to go to you, Sandra. And Sandra and I have been speaking quite a bit about some of the commonly asked questions. We get a lot of questions, both myself as an HR consultant and Sandra as an accountant, around JobKeeper and payments and eligibility and declines in turnover and those sorts of things. So Sandra and I thought it would be useful to share a couple of those questions and the appropriate responses, because we know it can be incredibly confusing trying to navigate schemes and provisions and so on. So if that's okay with you, Sandra, I might just go, I just might ask you to introduce yourself and then we'll go to some of those questions.
Okay, sure. My name's Sandra Magann. I run a business called Seachange Accounting. We're a team of 5 accountants, usually working out of Gordon Street, but for the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've been working from home. Ordinarily around this time of year, we're helping clients with fringe benefits tax planning, BAS returns, tax returns. But for about the last 5 weeks, we've been working on some of the government stimulus measures, particularly the cash flow boost and the last 5 weeks JobKeeper. So yeah, just living and breathing JobKeeper. So I'm glad of the opportunity to be able to share some of what we're learning and help answer some questions.
Great, thank you so much. And I guess one of the specific questions that, you know, we both agree we get asked a lot is around single touch payroll. So what's the I guess the brief on that in terms of whether you need to be registered or what you can do manually?
Yes, you can. When you're claiming for JobKeeper, you can actually identify your employees. So if you're not registered for single touch payroll and you haven't got that up and running, you can identify your employees. So you just need their tax file number and date of birth. And then once you've actually nominated and identified those employees in the claim process, the next month they will pre-fill. So when you go to do your monthly claim the following month, those employees' details will be there.
Great. And before we open up for questions around payroll, the other question is around the fact that JobKeeper gets paid fortnightly, or it's based on a fortnightly payment. What about for our members or business owners who pay on a different cycle to that?
So the ATO are advising that you don't need to actually change your pay cycle as long as your payment dates fall within that fortnight. So if you're paying on a fortnight, you should have one payment date that falls within that JobKeeper fortnight. And the same for your weekly pays. You should have two payment dates that fall within that JobKeeper period. And they've also allowed for where you might pay monthly, as long as that monthly equivalent meets the $1,500 per fortnight, that will be allowed as well. And I think the payment date for that is by the end of the month. So as long as the monthly pay is done by the end of the month, that will then meet that criteria.
Great. So that's kind of like the two big ones around payroll. I'm just checking the chat box and I haven't got any questions from the attendees. Has anyone got a question regarding payroll, or will we move on to the questions around the 30% turnover decline? No? Okay, so that's the other kind of big subject area I know you've been dealing with, Sandra. So, you know, we're all now, well, many of us are now familiar with what we need to lodge when it comes to claiming the JobKeeper. So the piece around forecasting, how important is that, and what's the implications of that number that people are putting into the ATO site?
Okay. So there's two forecasts. The first one that you may have used a forecast to determine your eligibility for JobKeeper. So to forecast that you expect your turnover will drop by 30% to meet that criteria. So it might have been a forecast for the month of May, or it might be coming months, or even the June quarter. So what the ATO have said about that is you might forecast one that you expect it to drop by 30%. If that doesn't happen, you don't lose your entitlement to JobKeeper. As long as that forecast made on a reasonable basis and you've documented what that is, they will accept that. So the other forecast is every month when you do your monthly reporting going forward, you need to forecast what your turnover, what you expect it to be for the coming month. And that's really just for the ATO to measure how the economy is going and just and information gathering. That doesn't then, I guess, make you ineligible for JobKeeper.
Correct. Yeah, it's interesting. I get asked this question. Oh, but what the government is saying that they're going to claw back that money. So for those businesses that have recovered really quickly, they're going to claw back the JobKeeper. And I said, well, could you send me that information? Because I haven't read anywhere about having to be financially responsible for repaying money if you're fortunate enough to have recovered your business quickly. Do you get asked that a lot?
I do, yes. And I think a lot of people have self-excluded themselves from JobKeeper because they're not certain that they will continue to meet that decline. But you only have to meet the test once. So if you experienced a drop, say, in your March 20 figures to March 19 or April 20 to April 19, that's enough for you to become eligible. What happens after that won't exclude you from JobKeeper, or it won't require you to repay any money.
Great. And what about, I get asked this one a bit, is like, how do I prove that COVID-19 caused my downturn? And yeah, do you get asked that one a lot?
We do, yes, we do. And it's not a requirement. You only have to meet that downturn. I guess it's a difficult thing to determine what's actually caused the decline. So if you've met that relevant decline in your turnover, it might be using the basic test, or there are some alternate tests out there for those businesses that may have experienced a significant increase in their turnover for the few months before COVID. There's those tests to show that there's been a decline as well.
Yeah, an opportunity for you to identify an anomaly that makes your financials look a little distorted in one direction or another. So it is complicated, and whilst there's a lot to be said about the simplicity of JobKeeper and that they've tried to make it easy to administer, there's still just so many questions around the details. So it's great that we've got people like Sandra who can help understand that. And I know similarly, and there's a question in the chat right now around the provisions that have been implemented on a temporary basis from a Fair Work perspective and what we can and can't direct and request our teams to do during this time. And the question is about outlining what employers can do when employees will not come back to work that is outside their normal job roles. What are each party's legal obligations? And the answer comes down to, and I heard Sandra, you use this word a lot too, it comes down to what's reasonable. And whilst, you know, if you make a reasonable direction for a person to change their work hours or their work duties, then you can make that direction. And if you make a reasonable request of an employee to change their duties or to use leave, and it's a reasonable request, then they can't refuse that request. But because this word reasonableness comes into it so much, that's why there's a lot of questions about it. And I think it would have been impossible in such a short period of time for Fair Work or the ATO, in your case, Sandra, to have developed an incredible amount of resource and guidelines about what that means. So the onus is on the employer to behave reasonably and for employees to accept reasonable directions. And a lot of it comes down to the way that the relationship you had with your employees before COVID. You know, those people who invested a lot of time and energy in engaging with their teams in the past, it's coming back to be really beneficial because employees are really happy to work with employers. But we've certainly heard some stories on the other hand where people are trying to force other people to do things and people are refusing to do things, and it's very, very tricky, especially in such a stressful environment. So it's great to have you, Sandra, to help navigate that. So on a similar vein, we've invited Suzie to join us today because Suzie, who will introduce herself in just a moment, probably similarly to myself and Sandra, is finding herself providing advice and giving support in areas that are a little bit different to what you would normally do. So Suzie, can you introduce yourself for the listeners and for our members who have joined us this morning and give us a bit of an overview about the types of things you've been working with people over during these interesting times?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kayley, and thanks for having me today. And I hope everyone's going okay out in the network. So to introduce myself, I'm Suzie Barnaby and I'm a financial planner at Morgans Financial. I've had over 25 years experience in investment markets, financial strategy, investment management, etc. So in terms of what we've been doing at Morgans, we've been busy. So I would say that March and April have been some of the busiest months we've ever had in my experience at Morgans. In terms of what we've been doing, I guess it's been on a lot of levels. So in terms of our clients, it's really that communication through all of this, just that understanding that there's insecurity about what's happening. They need to talk about it, and they need to talk about it in the context of their own situation. So we've spent a lot of time on the phone to clients. And of course, we look at it on a lot of levels. So when I look at the stimulus packages that the government's put out, for a start, I think they've done a really good job. So I know you've said, yes, they had to put it together quickly, etc. But when you look at the numbers and when our economist looks at the numbers and what they've done an extremely good job. So if I look at that on a lot of levels, first of all, I'm looking at it in terms of how the big end of town, how big businesses are going, what their earnings are like, how they're going to be affected by all of this, because that affects how we manage portfolios. But at another level, I'm looking at it in terms of clients and also just the wider community as well. We think it's our responsibility, even if people aren't clients, to just kind of get some of that education out there in terms of what's going on and what they can do. So some of the stimulus measures, I guess Sandra has really gone through the measures that are targeted at businesses in particular, small to medium-sized businesses. Some of the things we've looked at particularly is income support for individuals and households. So some of those have been the early access to super, I can run through that a little bit if you'd like me to. So, yeah, basically, it's a temporary early release of superannuation measure where someone can take out $10,000 in this financial year and also $10,000 in the next financial year, in the 2021. The criteria for them having to do that is quite a bit simpler than JobKeeper, etc. It's just in regards to since the 1st of January this year, if they've either been made redundant or they've had their working hours reduced by 20% or more, or if they're a sole trader, if their business has had turnover reduced by greater than 20%. In terms of claiming for that, it's just via MyGov or the ATO portal on there. What we would always say to people though, is if you do need to do that, just look at measures in terms of when you're in a better position financially, putting some funds back into super in terms of compensating for that. And just to have a consideration of what effect that will have in terms of your retirement balance, etc. So that's one thing to consider. Another one, I guess, that's really pertinent to our client base is some of the measures for people that are actually retired. So such things as when someone does take an income stream from their superannuation, they do have a minimum amount they need to take each year. And the government's actually reduced that by half for this financial year and next financial year. The reason for that is investment markets have dropped quite a bit, as you know, because of COVID-19. So it just means that people don't need to take as much capital out of their super in this kind of environment. Also, some of the other issues is changing of deeming rates as well. But I guess some of the measures that affect individuals, it's probably quite similar, I guess, to Sandra when she looks at companies and when she kind of gives small businesses tips on what to do around cash flow. And I would just, if you'd like, I'd just kind of go through some of those for individuals as well. And for small businesses, and one of them is just stress test your cash flow constantly through all of this. We can't take back time, but make sure in the future you can't always have a cash buffer there, whether it be a couple of months, 3 months or so of cash. Review your outgoings, and I would say that for everyone at the moment. You don't have to single-handedly, I guess, get the economy going again. Just, you know, really watch where you're spending your money, both in your business and as an individual. I would also say to speak to your service providers, see if there's any extensions that you can actually have or any discounts. A lot of the insurance companies are offering discounts for a period of time at the moment. Speak to your bank as well, if you haven't already. And look at the stimulus measures, as I'm sure most people have. And if you've got any questions, you know, just drop us a line. We're always happy to help with that kind of thing. But the major thing I wanted to get to people, and I guess this is someone who's been through many things in investment markets. I've been through the 87 crash. I've been through the Asian financial crisis. I've been through the GFC. Every time markets have recovered, economies have recovered. So I just wanted to leave a sense of optimism with everyone that this is going to take time, but we will recover. It's a case of when, but markets always recover and economies do as well. Yeah, just open to any questions out of that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Suzie. Any questions either from other panel members or also from our members who have joined us today? We're all right? Maybe that was because you were so thorough, Suzie, but you've definitely given us food for thought. And, you know, it's a topic that we're, you know, not just amongst ourselves, but also everyone we talk to, we're talking about those sorts of things. And it's great to have it clarified, particularly the piece around super, but also some great tips there. So Some questions might come as we go. But just mindful that we haven't heard from Cara yet today. So, Cara, can you start by introducing yourself and then maybe give us an overview of the sort of things that you've been working on recently that have been really helpful for businesses?
Thank you so much, Kayley, and thank you, Kelly. So my name's Cara Dale. I'm the Director of C2 Hills Consultancy. We're based down at Lake Cat. And our job is to share the knowledge, the big wheel of government with the small world of businesses and how those two wheels can align. And taking on, what Suzie was talking about, recovery plans, a number of the grants at the moment have just brought in some exemptions, and basically we do a lot around special considerations. We do a lot of grant writing and a lot of tender writing. But one of the things that they have brought in is if you're looking at part of your recovery strategy, doing a reinvestment of how you do or changing how you deliver your services in the future, if you're looking at financial advice on how you can implement them, marketing and branding and sort of all those key cornerstones of your business. If you can put a story together about how the bushfires indirectly affected your business, like you may have had to reduce staff or close services because roads or smoke or other impacts happened, you may be able to get some financial support, particularly from the federal government, to offset some of those professions that you get in to help. And they can also help with, so what they've basically done is take away some of the turnover criteria. It's more about the impact and the need, and they've also allowed external industries that normally wouldn't benefit from those to be considered if you're in a bushfire affected area, which Port Macquarie Hastings Council is. So that's something that's changed, where again the government's trying to give business owners more tools to help with their recovery plans. We have been involved in a lot of the $10,000 special consideration, and what I would say is if you do not straight tick the guidelines and the boxes, then you need to look at special consideration, because those grants will be audited. And, if your ABN is less than 2 years old, you will have a high risk of an audit. So all I can say on the grant front is don't self-exclude, but understand what the bushfires did to your business from an indirect perspective, and then have a look at these other opportunities, because guidelines are broadening to allow businesses that used to not be able to get those financial supports to now be able to get them.
Thanks so much, Cara. I'm just madly working through the chat box. So a couple of questions have come up. So you definitely got people thinking there. So now everyone's brains are switched on for Monday morning. So thank you so much. And it feels like we've had a really good cross today of everything from grants to super and JobKeeper and taxation and fair work provisions and all sorts of things. So I'm going to take some questions from the group. We will start with a question that's come through on the chat box from you, Donna, which was around the 12th of March deadline. They're reporting to the ATO for JobKeeper. How much flexibility do businesses have around that, Sandra?
Okay, so this deadline refers to if you're wanting to claim JobKeeper as an eligible business participant. So if you're a sole trader, a partner, a director shareholder of a company, or a beneficiary of a trust, you needed to meet some additional requirements, and they are that on the 12th of March, you had an ABN, and that you'd either lodged your 2019 tax return, or that you had lodged a business activity statement from the 1st of July 2018. So for either the financial year for the 19 financial year, or a business activity statement in the current financial year. So particularly for new businesses that are starting up, that they may not have lodged their 19 return, or they're not required because they're a new business, and they may not be registered for GST. So the ATO or the Commissioner will allow some discretion with this deadline, particularly if a business is registered with a tax agent and they have an extension to lodge. So if they're not required to lodge a tax return until May or June, or if there's bushfire extensions, which were granted to the Port Macquarie area. So that's potentially an area that you could seek the Commissioner's discretion on on that. So that discretion allowed for tax returns and business activity statements for the September 19 and December 19 quarter to be lodged up until the 28th of May. So, yeah, I'd advise you probably either talk to your accountant or call the ATO and see if you can have those extensions applied because you're in a bushfire affected region, and then apply to the tax office for an extension of time to enrol for JobKeeper.
Great, thank you. And I can see their message coming through saying thank you for that response. So very thorough and really informative. Thank you. Kelly, did you have a question?
Yes, so we've addressed a little bit about what's reasonable in terms of asking employees to alter their duties and their hours in the return to work under JobKeeper. We're also hearing from businesses where they're finding that employees have an expectation that because they've been receiving JobKeeper while the business is closed, and so therefore they haven't had to work, now that they're being asked to return to work, that there is an expectation that they'll continue to receive JobKeeper, but also get paid for the hours that they work on top of JobKeeper. So if we can get a bit of clarity, I guess I understand it, but as an employer, but I guess some clarity for other employers and also employees, so they're very clear on what their entitlements are now that they're part of the JobKeeper scheme that's coming through from the government.
Great. I'm happy to answer that, but I might go to you, Sandra, because...
there is a lot of advice on the ATO site about this, but JobKeeper is really a scheme to support businesses to retain their employees, and it's a payment that's received by the employer. It's not received by the employee. So the requirement is that you meet the minimum $1,500 gross payment per fortnight. So if there's some ordinary hours that are being worked, that forms part of the $1,500, and then you must top up that the hours that you're paying up to the minimum of $1,500. Where you might be paying more than $1,500, that then continues and you've met that $1,500 requirement, and then you receive from the government to help support the employment.
Yeah, I think, does that help, Kelly? Or
Yes, thank you. Did you have anything to add, Kayley?
Well, I just think you're absolutely right in that a lot of employees think they're on JobKeeper. And JobKeeper, as Sandra said, is a scheme for employers. But because it's been discussed so openly in the media, of course, people, and by their employers, people think, I am on JobKeeper, I am getting $750. Well, actually, your employer is getting the $750 so that they can pay you a minimum of $750 per week. And then there's a lot, as you said, around what an employer can reasonably expect in return for that. And you've highlighted a situation where some people have been receiving it for doing nothing. Now, that just happens to be that was the situation their employer was under. They could live next door to someone who has exactly the same job description, but has been going to work and cleaning out storerooms or sitting at home updating databases for that same amount of money. It's just, there's a lot of flexibility for the employer around what they can reasonably expect for that money. But I think, as Sandra said, the communication needs to, well, it'd be great if the communication could be clearer to not just to all Australians that it's a program for employers. And the clue is in the title. It is so that they can keep their job. And their job requires a little bit of reasonable flexibility at the moment because they are going to be, because otherwise the employer wouldn't be eligible, in working for a recovering business. Because if the business didn't need to recover, they wouldn't be eligible for JobKeeper.
Yes, thanks, Kayley.
So it's tricky, but I know with communication skills like yours, you're going to be fine. But
look, we're hearing it across a lot of businesses, and I think that I think the fact that employees had the option to select their employer and choose to be in JobKeeper has I guess, been misinterpreted in terms of what their expectations are. Now that there is, you know, a lot more businesses are opening, particularly in that hospitality industry. We're seeing that as the JobKeeper kicks in, that more and more businesses are opening. And obviously, as we see the easing of restrictions from this Friday, there'll be even more happening. So businesses that have been trying to retain all of their employees but only still operating on limited hours or takeaway or whatever that might be, means that there have been quite a number of employees not working during this period up until now.
And I mean, it's totally understandable that that a lot of people are confused about it, because it's brand new. 2 months ago, it didn't even exist. So not only are we dealing with a whole lot of new legislation, provisions, schemes, etc., we're also doing in a time of incredible amount of stress. So both personally and from a business point of view. So it's totally understandable. And that's why we really hope that these sessions help people in a really conversational way to better understand the complexities, and to realise by listening to questions like yours, Kelly, as well as Donna's, that we've all got a lot of questions, and they're not silly questions. They're totally understandable, that both our employees and ourselves have got a lot of questions in this time. So I'm mindful of time, and our listeners have never asked us to keep short, but I know that, you know, it's a lot to listen to. So I might just go around and just check in with any final updates. But before I do that, I just want to go to you, Kayley, and see if you've got any questions, or you're still just happy listening in.
No questions. I'm just obviously new to jumping in on the forum, but yeah, you guys are amazing.
Well, thank you. And it's great to have faces. So I really appreciate that. Not to mention the fact that you've got a fabulous name. So it's nice to meet you. It's very rare to meet another Kayley. So
yeah, I would agree.
So Cara, I'll just go to you and see if you've got any final words for Kayley, and also for anyone listening in on YouTube.
I guess just as part of your recovery plan, understand the impact of what the bushfires had to your business from an indirect perspective, because they may be able to harness additional support or offset getting external consultants in to help you around HR, marketing and financial. And also, if you, if you're not in the box for either of the two $10,000 grants, don't exclude yourself, but look at special consideration and go down that path to secure financial support, because there is a pathway available for businesses.
Great, thank you so much, Cara. And that your message is always really clear, is it's not to self-exclude and to look at what's available. So thank you. Anything else from you, Sandra?
Really just a reminder about deadlines. So there's still time to enrol if you haven't already for JobKeeper. If you think you may be eligible, it's still worth considering. So you've got until the 31st of May to enrol and claim for April and May. One of the requirements is if you have employees that they've been paid. However, if you're enrolling as an eligible business participant, say as a sole trader or a partner, there's no requirement to actually pay that $1,500 out. So that, yeah, just consider that date that you have until the 31st of May to enrol and claim for April and for May.
Great, thank you, Sandra. And I really appreciate that you always give us clarity around things like deadlines, because it's just so much to take in. So, and again, a similar message to Cara's, in that, you know, don't self-exclude, and it can be, all of this can be done in a relatively simple way. Suzie, thank you so much for joining us. Have you got anything else you want to finish up with?
No, just thank you. It was great being part of the panel. I really enjoyed listening to Sandra and Cara as well, and their messages about not self-excluding yourself, etc. And just to say, the information is out there, the ATO side, etc. There is so much information on it. And just a big hats off to all the accountants in town. I know how busy they've all been, and it's been crazy. And I've heard from many a client how grateful they've been for their advice of their accountant during this time, Sandra. And just the magnitude of this, I heard the other day, so far 1.1 million Australians have applied for early release of their super. So it's incredible how well, I guess, the infrastructure is working. the ATO portal, etc., to be able to just execute all of that. But no, just a message to everyone of we will get through this. So hope everyone's doing well.
Thank you, Susie. And you're right, it's huge, isn't it? And just to think, like, just when you look at our friends over in Britain and the States, you think we've gone through so much here in Australia, but we think it's all been worth it because look at the lives that have been saved. It certainly has somehow, you know, it's been an incredibly sad period, but also it could have been a lot worse if we didn't put the measures in place that we did. And I know if Leslie was here, she'd be pushing that message of how important it is to just stay vigilant and to still get tested and to still remember we are in a health crisis. And whilst we might be coming out of it, we can't take our finger off the pulse. We need to still be really, really careful and really look after each other. We'll go to you, Kelly, and see what final words that you've got. There, it looks like the sun's setting in Lake Cat-Eye, so we've still got a whole day to get through here in Port Macquarie. Oh, you're on mute. Still on mute. Hang on, I'm trying to unmute you. There you go.
I'm unmuted now, sorry. So, sorry, no sunset, but these are beautiful backgrounds of Port Macquarie that have been created by our tourism association. So, I think I got them just off social media. So I would encourage people to use them so that if you're doing Zoom, people, once restrictions are lifted, can see how beautiful Port Macquarie is and want to come and visit us and help our local businesses recover from what's been quite a terrible 6 months of bushfires, drought, floods, COVID-19. So no further messages from me, just again a thank you to you, Kayley, who've been the driving force behind these sessions each week, and to our panel, Sandra, Cara, and also to Susie for joining us this morning as our special guest. Your messages are always beneficial, informative, and I'm sure lots of people take away this information and apply it in their businesses. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Kelly. And thanks for joining us, Kayley. And goodbye to all our listeners. So I'll just stop the recording.